anytime that I'm feeling either anxious or stressed out, if I have the discipline to put myself into the podcast and start scripting out a new episode or researching ideas for the next holiday, it's definitely a good way to switch my mindset into focusing on something that's healthy. And then it's also great that not only is it kind of a healthy thing to think about, it's also really fun.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Podcast for Podcasters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Latham, and today with us we have Kristin Seering, host of the Holidays After Dark podcast. How are you doing, Kristin?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
I'm really well. Thanks for coming on. So to start with, if you can tell us a little bit about why you started your podcast, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Holidays After Dark for multiple reasons. First, and the most basic probably is I'm just generally a big lover of podcasts. I have been since about 2017, 2018. I was in a job previously where I was kind of on my own a lot. And so I used podcasts to kind of keep me company throughout the day and to keep me entertained and awake sometimes. And then I switched jobs and I went to a job that was a little bit more stressful, and the type of stuff that I work with is a little bit more intense, especially on the mental aspect. And we're really focused on finding ways to make sure that our mental health is good to go, and that the job doesn't negatively impact our lives outside of the job. And so my coworkers knew that I was a big fan of podcasts. And so one time we were sitting around brainstorming ideas, and he said, I think a great hobby for you would be to start your own podcast because you love them so much. And so I thought he was definitely on to something. So I started brainstorming ideas. And the one thing that I've always been known for is my love of holidays, all holidays throughout the year. I've been obsessed since I was a kid. So then I took that and thought, okay, I'm definitely going to do a holidays podcast. But then I also took my love for kind of the darker, more alternative side of life. I've been described as being like goth or punk before, depending on who you ask. I've been into that type of music and stuff for a long time. So basically, I took, all those elements of my life and mashed them into one. And then that's how I came up with Holidays After Dark.
Wow, that's amazing. So it came as a way to sort of look after your mental health and practice self-care, which especially now we're seeing is coming more to light how important that is. Have you found it effective at that? Has it helped you sort of stay balanced?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's been very effective. I've been doing the podcast. It'll actually be 1 year on February 1st. So it hasn't been super long, but I can definitely say that in this past year, anytime that I'm feeling either anxious or stressed out, if I have the discipline to put myself into the podcast and start scripting out a new episode or researching ideas for the next holiday, it's definitely a good way to switch my mindset into focusing on something that's healthy. And then it's also great that not only is it kind of a healthy thing to think about, it's also really fun. And the community that I've met through doing the podcast so far has been great. So it's given me kind of like some built-in internet friends, which is awesome. And I love learning from other people who have been doing it longer than me. So yeah, I'm definitely very grateful to have it in my personal life. It's something that I look forward to. I love talking about it. I love sharing it with people. So yeah, I definitely have no plans to stop anytime soon.
Amazing. So you've been going for a year now, and have you been releasing episodes constantly throughout the past year?
Yeah, so typically I release episodes every other week or every 2 weeks. The first month of the podcast, which was last February, I released an episode like 3 weeks in a row just because I really wanted to get things off and running. And so I did that, but then I kind of fell into the every other week thing. My episodes are fully scripted, and so it definitely takes some planning and effort between each episode. Um, Not that it doesn't take planning and effort if you aren't scripted, but mine is definitely I have to sit down and literally write out the episode, and then I usually rehearse it multiple times. And even just coming up with the ideas, because I don't just want to talk about the parts of holidays that everyone already knows. I want to find like the weird facts and things that have happened associated with them that is a little bit more interesting or unknown. This January, I did take a bit of a break between season one and season two, just so that I could kind of gear up for season two coming up, try to come up with some fresh ideas and get my Valentine's Day episodes ready. But typically, the schedule is every other week.
Okay, so when you're making those scripts, what does that process look like? How do you do the research? How do you write them? How long does it take you?
Yeah, so honestly, for the research part, I mean, the internet is my friend. Whenever I do find a piece of information on the internet that I want to use, I definitely try to validate it by finding it through multiple sources. I'm not just going to take, one website's word for something, because I certainly don't want to be repeating bad information or incorrect information. So I do a lot of Googling, a lot of Google searches, a lot of history websites. But then I also have turned to quite a few books. I own books about holidays. I own books about, kind of alternative things. Like, for instance, in one of my Valentine's Day episodes coming up, I'm actually talking about how vampires are associated with romance.
Mm.
And I already owned an entire book kind of about how vampires' relationship with society and how we view them. So, um, yeah, I use books, I use the internet. I'm always happy to accept ideas from friends, family, listeners. I love when someone suggests something to me and then I look into it and it ends up being really great. For instance, someone recently asked if I would do a Mardi Gras episode, so I'm going to plan to do one of those. But yeah, it's basically just anywhere that you can find reputable information. I've probably looked there at least once or twice before.
And have you done much writing in the past, or is script writing quite a new thing for you?
So script writing specifically is definitely new for me. On the writing side in general, from going to college and grad school, I definitely became, I think, a decent writer. I can write fairly quickly. And I feel like I'm decent at being able to write in the same way that I speak.
Hmm.
And so when I am actually writing, I picture myself saying it, because I don't want to sound like I'm reading a book. I want to sound like how I would just talk, maybe just even in a casual conversation. So once I actually have all the ideas and all the research done, actually scripting everything out really doesn't take terribly long. Sometimes, because I do work on a computer all day at work, sometimes the only barrier that I ever have is like I'll get home from work and I'm like, oh man, the last thing I want to do is like type on a computer more. um, so that's why I do usually end up working on things a lot more on the weekends once I've had a little bit of a break from that. But yeah, it's not too terrible of a process. I find once I just sit down and power through it, I can usually knock it out pretty quickly.
Oh, nice. And you found that releasing an episode every 2 weeks has sort of kept the workload at a stage where it is still a stress relief and it doesn't become a stressor in itself.
Oh, absolutely. Typically, when an episode is coming out, I've usually already scripted, if not recorded, the following episodes. So it's kind of funny because sometimes when an episode does come out, I'm like, oh, yeah, I talked about that, because I've already kind of mentally moved on to the next one because I've been dealing with that and planning for that one now. So I try to work at least a few weeks ahead, because then if I do have like travel or anything else, I don't ever want to be where I'm like scrambling trying to get something done, because I don't want to push out like a lower quality product just because I didn't time things out well.
Hmm. That's exactly the same with what I do. I always like to have a couple interviews in your back pocket so that if life does come out, you don't feel like you have to
Oh
rush and
yeah.
push out something.
Yeah, it's part of the reason why I took this break in January, is because the holidays and stuff were so crazy. And so I was like, okay, I need a breather to kind of plan out the next few episodes and get ahead of the game a little bit, because before you know it, the year just catches up with you and you're like drowning in your hobby, which is not the point of the hobby.
That's exactly it. So you do the script writing, you do the recording, do you do all the editing and distribution yourself as well?
So editing, no, I'm definitely grateful because my sister, no, she has worked in the film industry, has a degree in film, so she knows how to do audio editing. I don't have any video stuff, but she does do like film editing and stuff, and so thankfully, she was gracious enough to do that work for me for free. So basically, my process is once I get done recording an episode, I then just push off the raw file to her, and then she edits it and then sends it back to me. And then if I have anything that I want her to change or whatever, she'll do that. And then I'll also send her like the music that I want incorporated in the episode, and kind of where I want that music placed. But I'm definitely, like I said, grateful because I know nothing about that kind of stuff. I mean, literally nothing. So the thought of having to learn it would be very daunting. And just because I do work a full-time job besides this and all that, the thought of having to plan, script, research, record, and do all the editing, like I don't even know that it would truly be feasible for me until I became super comfortable with the editing. So yeah, it's definitely beneficial to know someone who already knows how to do that like the back of their hand because um she can knock it out way quicker than I ever could.
Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of the sort of what is often the most difficult part of making a good show is the editing. So if you have someone that can do that for you, that's perfect. Where do you get your music from that you send over to her?
Yeah, so I pay for an Upbeat premium subscription. Upbeat is a website where a lot of independent artists just upload. Sometimes they're just like little audio clips, sometimes they're full-length songs. And when you pay for the premium subscription, which is super cheap, it's like a couple bucks a month, you then have like unlimited access to their library, and you also then don't deal with any like copyright issues. Like the music is on there and available for use specifically for things like podcasts. So you don't have to worry about just like finding a random song online and then thinking like, could the artist hear it one day and like sue me or something? So I saw Upbeat as a recommendation when I first started the podcast, and then I've been super happy using it. They even have like sound effects and you can just search whatever you're looking for and they have a multitude of options. So it's, and plus I love supporting like independent artists like that. So I've been super happy with it.
Okay, Upbeat. That's definitely something that I'll look into as well. That sounds interesting. That's a good tip. So which part of the production do you enjoy the most? Is it the research, the script writing, the recording, or listening back to it itself? Which part kind of do you enjoy the most?
I think probably the upfront research is probably like where I get my most like initial excitement, especially when I find an idea that I like am really happy about or think is really interesting. And I kind of like it because I'm the type of person like I always like learning about new things. I like discovering things I didn't know before. And so a lot of the times the information that I've used, like it's brand new to me too. Like I didn't know that about the holiday or whatever. And so I like simultaneously learning and then sharing that knowledge with other people. It's kind of funny, like as in regards to the final product, like I feel like I've already listened to the episode so many times by the time it comes out that I do listen to it. Just because I mean, kind of my philosophy is like you have to be your own biggest fan. And if you don't want to listen to your show, other people probably won't want to listen to your show. So I do listen to it, but by the time I listen to it when it's come out, it may have lost a little bit of its excitement for me because, you know, I wrote the script, I practiced it multiple times, I recorded it, I listened to the edited product before I actually upload it. So I'm like, okay, I've heard this thing like 7 times. Um, but like I said, you do have to be your own biggest fan, I think. So I'll pop it on when I'm getting ready in the morning or something and I'm like, okay, there we go. There's my one listen from myself like to add to my listen count. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're completely right. You do have to be your number one biggest fan. And also, I think listening back to your episodes is the best way to find where you can improve because you do notice those little bits that you may not have noticed before, maybe where it lags a little bit or some bits which are really good. So it's a great way to improve by listening to what you've done in the past, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. You learn from, like you said, listening. And if something is like, okay, well, that kind of bored me, it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to talk about something like that again. Or, oh, I still thought it was interesting even on the seventh time. Then that's probably something to continue doing. So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
So you must have released around 20 episodes now, if I've got that right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so have you found any in particular have performed well or you've been particularly proud of?
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy because obviously I started the podcast like at the furthest possible time in the year away from like Christmas and Halloween because I started it in February and people had kind of been telling me like, "Oh, I think it's going to like your listens are going to explode like once we do get into that time of year." And they were definitely right. As soon as we got into like the October or Halloween time, those episodes started getting significantly more listens than all the other ones that I had put out, which I mean makes sense because there are, us diehard holiday lovers who seek out holiday material all year, but the majority of the world, I think, is only thinking about holidays for the big ones like Halloween and Christmas and the ones that you can get really excited about. So as predicted, yes, it was a very good time of year. My hope, because I've only I released a New Year's episode, but that's been my only one since like the Halloween Christmas season. My hope is that once I start releasing season 2 episodes, I'll see some of that carryover that hopefully the Halloween and Christmas season maybe brought me a few more listeners that are then going to stick through it for the entire year. Like I said, it's too early to determine that, but that's kind of my hope is that that upswing maybe brought some long time listeners. So we'll see.
Oh, that's exciting. So did you promote those episodes across any other platforms or was that all just organically people who just searched holiday podcast and had found your show?
I definitely am big on promotion. So I have the podcast on Instagram. I have a Twitter page for it. I have a Facebook page for it. Twitter is the one that I use the most because it's where I've seen the biggest engagement. The Instagram is decent. Facebook, I've never been a fan of Facebook and I still don't fully like understand it. I didn't have one before I made one for the podcast. So like I'm always like Facebook, don't even get me started, but Twitter has definitely been great. That's also where I have found like the biggest community to be a part of other podcasters like multiple I'm on like multiple like holiday podcaster like direct message streams, and they're the ones that ended up telling me about like a podcaster Discord group that I joined and things. So it's always kind of hard to say, I guess, where your upswing in listens is coming from, whether it was just people searching like on Spotify or whatever, or if it was from the social media. But promotion is definitely a thing that I spend a lot of time on. I try to either tweet or post or whatever at least once a day. I try to engage other people's tweets, listen to other people's podcasts that I found out about on Twitter, things like that. So, I think if you just release a podcast and don't take the time to promote it, you're probably going to be fairly unhappy with the results. And it is a lot of work. It can be very time consuming. I mean, sometimes I'll catch myself and I'm like, man, I've been scrolling on Twitter doing stuff, replying to people for like 30 minutes now. Like I should probably go do something else. But then when I see the direct engagement from that, it's motivating to keep promoting in that way.
Hmm. As you say, it's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you just end up hidden in the internet multiverse. And there's so many podcasts out
Exactly.
there. How are people going to find you if you're not promoting?
Oh yeah, I mean, podcasts are endless, and so unless you are that person, and like you don't want to be obnoxious about it, obviously. Like I think there is a fine line, but I mean, if I see someone straight up asking for a podcast recommendation, and if my show fits the things that they're asking for, like I have no shame in sending them a link and saying, if you want to try it, I would be grateful.
Mhm.
So it's definitely important.
So that's interesting that podcasting has opened up this new community to you as well. Has that been, as you say, mainly through Twitter and this Discord server that you found through Twitter?
Yes, absolutely. The thing that has like blown me away the most about podcasting is just like how welcoming everyone is. Like I always thought that just, everyone that has a podcast would be like pitted against each other, like it's some sort of like competition because it's like, well, I want to be the biggest podcaster, but I have not encountered any of that at all. I don't know if I've just gotten lucky or if podcasting just tends to attract a good group of people, but it's been very refreshing just having people that I like literally do not even know full blown supporting and retweeting and posting about a new episode of mine or inviting me into chat groups where we can share advice about podcasting and all that. So yeah, that was originally 100% out of Twitter and then has migrated to Discord a little bit, but um and that's kind of the thing that I like about the premise of your podcast is that you're pretty much the epitome of that. I mean, you're taking the time to have a podcast about other podcasts, and it's like in some ways that's such a selfless yet fun thing to do, which is what intrigued me when I saw your show because now that I've had people being so gracious towards me the past year, I certainly want to be that person for new podcasters in the future. So to me, I'm always like, the more that we can support each other and help each other grow, and just have fun together and share ideas, I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Hmm. I mean, I've absolutely loved running this podcast. It's only been about a month now, but it started out just to kind of learn a bit more about what went on behind podcasting and why people spent so long on things they were so passionate about. Because as I'm sure you found out with writing your scripts, it's not a quick, easy process. But then through having these conversations with people, as you say, everybody just wants to lift each other up, which is such a lovely thing to see. And I feel like in a lot of other worlds, it's the opposite. People want to hold the secrets to themselves. I haven't delved into Twitter much, but Reddit I use quite a lot, which I think is where we met. And I found the community of podcasters on Reddit is just so welcoming. And as you say, someone might direct message you, and you end up chatting to them for a couple days, giving each other's advice and tips, which is just a lovely thing.
Oh, absolutely. And like the way I look at it is like, okay, like very few people actually make a lot of money podcasting. So clearly, like, we're most of us are not in it for the money because if you are, like, you're probably going to be disappointed. But so it's like when you are going to dedicate so much of your life to something, it has to be rewarding in other ways, and I think that podcasting can be rewarding in so many other ways that, at least for me, I mean, sure, if I ever do get a little bit of money through something, I'm never going to turn it down, don't get me wrong, but it certainly is not what keeps me going. I think even if I was raking in thousands of dollars from the podcast but just didn't have the excitement of the community with it, I don't know that it would be something that I'd really want to do.
That's exactly it. I think if you set out to do your podcast to make money, you'll never be successful. But if you do it because you're passionate, you enjoy the topic that you're on, you like meeting people, you like building that community, then it can become such a fulfilling part of your life. And especially with your story, hearing how it's helped you with your mental health is really inspiring for sure.
I appreciate that.
It's lovely to talk to someone that obviously enjoys making the podcast so much, because I have a lot of people come on who talk about all the unexpected stresses and challenges, often revolving around audio editing. So maybe that's a trick you've got there.
Yeah.
But have you found anything that you don't enjoy doing? Anything that you have found stressful or difficult or challenging?
Yeah, so especially in the beginning when I would record because it is scripted, when I make an error, I then, pause and go back and say it properly. And I think at first I was putting like so much pressure on myself and on the way that the recording turned out, even like pre-editing, that I would do like 3 or 4 takes where I would go through the entire script. And so my recording would take well over an hour because I just was always convinced, like, well, that take wasn't good enough and that take wasn't good enough. But now, thankfully, and I think it's just been time and experience and having faith in the editing, that I trust my raw product more, I guess. Because I do listen back to the pre-edited cut before I send it to my editor, because I want to note the times where there are mistakes made, to hopefully make the editing process a little bit easier. And like I said, when I used to listen to those, I would just like rip myself apart, like in my head, just being like, this isn't good, this isn't going to turn out good. But now like I said, I've developed enough faith in the process that, of course, when I listen to the raw unedited version, it's not going to be what I want to put out into the world, because that's not the point of it. So yeah, I used to kind of almost dread recording in some ways, but I was like, okay, that has to change, because that's a large part of it, and that's supposed to be like one of the most fun parts.
Mm.
So thankfully I've been able to come around in my head, and I do look forward to recording now. And now a lot of the time I only end up doing one take, because I just feel I have confidence in it. I feel like I've improved just through practice and experience, and I have faith in the editing process that it's going to turn out well. Other than that, I pretty much genuinely enjoy all the rest of the process. I love the promotion side. Like, I have stickers with my QR code that takes you to my website on there, and I love like being out, whether I'm traveling or whatever, and passing those out or sticking them to lamp poles or wherever, sending them to friends who live around the country to distribute, things like that. So yeah, the rest of it is fun, but I just had to get around that initial like fear of not being good enough, I guess. And now that I've kind of gotten over that, it's a pretty stress-free process in general.
Amazing. Those the stickers is a great idea. I've never heard of that one before. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, I think it's a website, I believe it's called makestickers.com, and you can order them in bulk. I use a separate QR code generator that never expires. So the idea is that even if someone scans the sticker like 5 years from now, it would still take you to my website. Because I have a website specifically for the podcast. But yeah, and so it's fun. I'll just be out and, like I said, either lay them down somewhere or directly hand them to people, and it's definitely a cool thing that people can stick to wherever they want to stick it to, and hopefully then listen to your show.
Yeah, that's a really fun little idea. So I would be missing an opportunity if I didn't ask you what was your favorite holiday, or if one of your favorite dark holiday facts, maybe.
Sure. So it's funny, like, because of my alternative side, people always assume that my favorite holiday is Halloween, but Halloween is actually a very close second to Christmas for me. And that's largely due, I think, to the like nostalgia factor associated with Christmas for me. Because as a kid, before the darkness and alternativeness took over, uh, Christmas was far and away my favorite holiday. And I also have the most like positive childhood memories associated with Christmas and the traditions. And I do like how Christmas is, more of a season than a holiday in a lot of ways. Like, to me, the actual holiday itself can be kind of sad because it means like Christmas time is about to be over. But because I start celebrating Christmas like November 1st, it's basically like 2 months of fun for me. Whereas Halloween, I mean, Halloween definitely has a season too. Like, I celebrate it, from pretty much early September until the actual day. But I feel like the world as a whole doesn't quite embrace the season as much. Um, so yeah, I love both. I love combining the two. I my apartment kind of always has an element of Halloween going on, so then when you put Christmas on top of it, it meshes in kind of a cool like Nightmare Before Christmas sort of way. Um But yeah, and then as far as like favorite like behind the scenes like holidays facts, so I work in an element of law enforcement, and so I've always been like a big true crime nerd. Part of the reason why I got into the career that I did. And so I've kind of enjoyed like exploring, famous or maybe not so famous like crimes that have happened on holidays. Like there was a New Year's Day massacre that I didn't know about. Or, these two teenage lovers were murdered on Valentine's Day, like those sort of things, because it shows that, like, unfortunately, horrible things still happen on days when most of the world might be celebrating. And so holidays are kind of like simultaneously a day for celebration, but also like a day of remembrance for a lot of people. So I feel like it kind of combines those in an interesting way. I also love like exploring other countries' traditions. Because being in the US, I think a lot of the times Americans as a whole are kind of like, everything that we do is the only way that you do it, and we're always right kind of thing. And that is not the case at all. And so many other countries, like European countries and whatnot, just have so many like interesting, cool ways that they recognize the holidays. So yeah, I love going around the world too to see what people do.
Well, that's so true because when you think of holidays, you think Christmas, Halloween, but then when you actually think about it, there's actually an endless amount of holidays around the world that you can explore.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, which is why it makes me feel confident about the longevity of my podcast, because it's not just the big main holidays that everyone thinks of. Like there are so many options, and really the opportunities in the way I look at it are endless.
Oh, that's so fun. So we're running up on time here, but just before we wrap up, I always like to ask if you have some top three tips for anybody who's thinking of starting a podcast or is just starting out.
Yeah, so my first tip would be when you're starting out, definitely start planning ahead like a few months before you actually plan to release an episode. I mean, for instance, like my first episode came out in the beginning of February 2022, but I started planning in like November of 2021. And I definitely needed that amount of time to really come up with the idea for the podcast, get all the equipment, because I mean, I had no microphone or anything like that. Like, I didn't know what type of recording software to use. Like, I knew nothing about it. I had to learn how to buy the domain name so that someone else didn't start using Holidays After Dark. I had to figure out how to make the website. I had to start writing the episodes. I had to learn how to use my recording equipment. And so before I knew it, those few months had passed. So I would definitely say plan ahead and give yourself time. Second, I would say definitely don't be afraid to promote. I know that sometimes people give podcasters crap for saying that like all we care about is talking about our podcast and whatever, but and there is a time and place, and I try not to be that obnoxious person, but you also can't be afraid to promote it, because that's the only way people are ever going to hear about it. So as long as you're not too in people's face, or kind of read the room, and if you think people would be interested, like why not? I mean, I've met some great people from telling them about my podcast and whatever. So don't be afraid to self promote. And then third, I would say definitely kind of treat yourself and like invest in decent equipment. Because I mean, a personal pet peeve of mine is if I go to listen to a podcast and the sound quality is just so bad, like then I can't even really focus on what you're saying. And you may be saying something that's great, but if it's hard for me to hear, or if it just doesn't sound good, or if your volume is constantly changing, it can just really ruin the entire experience. And so kind of treat yourself, try to get the best equipment that you can afford, put in the time to learn about, how to use the equipment. And of course, if you're lucky enough like me and you know someone that knows how to edit, ask them if they would like a resume builder, because I can tell you it's an absolute lifesaver not having to deal with any of that.
So to touch on that last point a little bit, how did you find out what microphone to go for? How did you get that information, and what microphone are you using?
Yeah, so I use the Elgato Wave 3 microphone, and then I also use a screen on it to kind of shield from like the pop sounds or heavy S sounds or the whatever multitude of things it's supposed to protect you from. And then I think the way I discovered it was honestly just through like a ton of research, a ton of reading people's opinions online and trying to see like which ones were people talking bad about, which ones were they talking positively about. I also have a coworker who is very technologically savvy, and he actually works at the place where I ended up, or he used to work at the place where I ended up getting my microphone. And so he kind of made recommendations based on what he knew about it, based on what was popular with customers. So really just I'm kind of like the way that if you were going to go, stay at a hotel or something, you might research it to see what people are saying to make sure it's not going to be terrible or something like that. I basically just kind of did some research, took a leap, definitely bought one that I could have returned if I needed to. Um, but thankfully I was happy with it from the get-go, and it's been very reliable and easy to use. So Elgato Wave 3 I would definitely recommend.
Amazing. We'll put that in the show notes as well. So
Awesome.
just before we go, if you'd like to let our listeners know how they can find your show or connect with you, that would be fab.
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram and Twitter, my handle is at Holidays Podcast. On Facebook, it's just Holidays After Dark. My website is www.holidaysafterdark.com. The podcast itself is on pretty much any platform that I could think of to put it on. It's on Spotify, Apple, Google, Radio Public, Good Pods. I'm actually probably going to be looking into putting it on a few more now that season 2 is getting going. It's on my list of things to do. But yeah, pretty much anywhere that I would think most people listen, you can listen. You could also listen directly through my website if you'd like. So
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Kristin. It's been lovely chatting.
absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the best of luck with your podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Podcast for Podcasters podcast. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have any suggestions for us, you can contact me at charlielatham5@gmail.com. That's charlielatham5@gmail.com. Before we go, I'd like to thank the sponsor of our show, Podcast Man. Podcast Man takes the pain out of podcasting production so you can spend more time meeting guests, having interesting conversations, and doing what you love. Find out more at podcastman.co.uk. Have a great day, everyone.